My name is Wopsogozi Yamoti Kangere, and this is Ibua Lounge. From all of us here in the studio at Uganda Society Library, a warm welcome to today's show. This is our second episode of Ibua Lounge, and before the show gets away, I would like our live audience to greet our audience online with our typical poetry duties. On today's show, you're going to meet one of our pilot residents from the Ibua program. We're going to be listening to some of his poetry, and we'll be listening to some short stories from him. To waste no more of your time, let's go right into the show and have our first reader, who is Alidechi Sama, coming to read the first poem. Alidechi, please. Welcome to Ibua Lounge.
Thank you.
Yeah. What poem are you going to read to us?
The poem is called Don't Tell Me You Love Me.
Don't tell me you love me. I hope you're not telling me not to love you. Tell me a bit about this poem.
Well, the poem is about a young woman.
Yeah.
To me, it's about a young woman who has gone through terrible things in love.
Yes.
And there is this person that is telling her, like he loves her.
Yes.
But she kind of does not believe it because she knows a different version of love than what he's presenting.
Is this something you know about?
Yeah.
All right. Please indulge us.
Don't tell me you love me. When you tell me you love me, I am terrified you don't. Like I do you. Terrified that I may lose you too. When you say you love me, say that I know not what love is. True, I do not know what that is. But I know of oxygen rejecting lungs. I know of bones drained of marrow. I know of walls painted with dung to keep out that which makes veins clogged, thin and narrow. I know of ropes snapping necks and of pillows absorbing tears wet. I know of memories haunting dreams, of forever and eternity ended in seconds, of smiles turned to screams, and minds filled with deceitful wiles. I know of tender touches and caresses converted to scratches, faith sought, lost and never found regardless. I know of promises broken, and yes, rotting corpses turning in their graves, disappointed. I know of sugar abandoning its sweetness to taste upon the tongue like death, and I know of death feeling more alive than life. Silent, calm, and peaceful. Ecstasies turn to misery. I know of that too. So don't tell me you love me. Just do.
Now, before we go any further, I would like to acknowledge our partners and the people who have helped bring this show together. Our hosts here at the Uganda Society Library, our partners in bringing this event together. Behind the camera and the sound is a wonderful team from 8 Media. The books that you are seeing behind me have been provided to us by the African Bookstore and Book Club, which is hosted here at the Uganda Society Library. So if you are into reading and you are looking for a place that you can find African literature, be it fiction, be it non-fiction, here is a place to go. Now, Ibua is a journal of short stories, of poetry, and of fiction. And as I said earlier, today we are going to be focusing on one of the residents. Now, the aim of this lounge is to give you the Ugandan reader some time an opportunity to meet and interact with the writers that we are going to be bringing to you on this platform. But before I call our mystery writer of the day, let's hear one more poem.
Now my sheets are wrinkled with worry, and my blanket freezes from warming me. Bearing this sorrow, my mattress thins daily, yet remaining thick with the sin I happen to be. I find solace in my pillow, soft, gentle and damp from comforting me. She, the shoulder I lean on, but my pillow, she hates me. She whispers horrors into my ear. Her shriek strokes me to sleep, so she haunts my dreams with the demons of my past that peep. The demons call me home, beckon me to bear witness, a tragedy in a place that soon will not be. My laughter and the angels of my memory, brick by brick, vanish. And the ground is left with nothing but the cry of sorries. And so I plunge my hands into the air, to try to reach for a breath, to grab a hold of a lifeline, to pull myself to the shore and breathe. But my knees, they sing the praises of pain and tell stories of weakness. They bleed with smiles dug deep into the ground and reminisce on times of hope as they cry for me not to become faithless. So my fingers lock each other. They warm my palms and squeeze themselves to pain as my teeth clatter with shivers of desperation for my lips and tongue to weave into tears. And when the moment the cascading beads dawned me with realization, I knelt and I prayed.
Wow, Mr. Odud, listening to you reading this poem, it sounded as if you were the one who wrote it. Where do you get, I don't know, what is it? How do you connect with something that you haven't written so well?
You know, when I first got this poem, I read through it and it didn't hit me in any way at all, shockingly. And then when
it felt like
this was just another poem I'm reading. And then 2 days later, like I kept trying to get into it. And 2 days later, as I was in my bed, I lay there and I was thinking. And I went back to a time when I was really feeling depressed, you know. I feel like this poem is a story of someone who was depressed a lot, and he was trying to find a place like where he could, you know, rest. And in the end, he goes down and he prays. Actually, this was the thing that brought it all out, because there was a time I was really depressed and I had a lot of issues. It was prayer that led me through. Yeah. So when I finally interpreted it that way, I went back. Like it took me back to that time, and I immediately connected with it. And yeah.
Wow. I've always found that very interesting about poetry, that you have got these poems that you read and very instantly you like it. And then you're going to meet these poems that you read and you don't connect with it immediately.
Yeah, that is true.
But then for some reason you keep coming back to it. You keep coming back to it. And each time you come back to it, it keeps growing on you. And then eventually you realize that you like this poem even more than all the other poems that you like. What is it about poetry that makes it like this? That gives us such, about reading poetry, that gives us such mixed feelings?
You know, I think poetry is just, it's almost a way of revealing life to us in a way we don't usually see. It's because, you know, poetry is everywhere. It's in the trees, it's in the birds, it's life. It's basically life. So when someone captures,
when I look at a tree, I'm looking at a poem.
Yeah, you're looking at a poem.
Okay,
that's what I think. Yeah. So
yeah.
When someone captures all that and puts it on a piece of paper, it's magic. Yeah, it's magic when you read it and it comes to
do you mean to say that when you look at a tree, there's a particular sense that you capture, which if the poet captures in words, then that's what poetry is?
That's what poetry is, yeah, totally.
Wow, wow. And do you read only poetry, or do you read other types of literature?
I also do, but I would not call myself an avid reader.
Oh, yeah.
But at the moment, I'm an avid reader of Achelam.
So you're an avid reader of one person?
So far.
So far.
I wasn't an avid reader before, but
Yeah.
then when I got introduced to his work,
Yeah.
I met him some time back at an event, a show called Milege, and yeah, that's why I got to interact with him and his poetry, and then it always connects, it always hits home.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
what
I've
was
never
it?
told him that. So
What was it about poetry that made you connect to it, and just in relationship to that, what's the difference between reading poetry and listening to it? Because you mentioned that the first time you had Mr. Achelam do anything, he was on a stage and he was performing, and then later on you encountered his reading, and his writing got you to start enjoying reading.
True. I think when poetry is performed, it's I think that's where it pushes to the side of entertainment.
Yeah.
When you're watching it and you're enjoying it, you're interacting with the person, with whatever he's doing on stage.
Yeah.
But when you pick it up and read it on your own, that's when it becomes spiritual.
Okay.
Yeah. It's no longer just entertainment. It's now you face to face with. Wow. Do you know what I was about to say? I was about to say God.
That was Mr. Odur. You heard him reading a bit of poetry from our guest writer this evening. I had hoped to keep his name in a little suspense, but Mr. Odur gave away the goose. So let's cut to the chase and go right ahead to invite Mr. Achelam, Derek, to join us here on the podium. Now, Mr. Achelam, I see you have come here with a very giant pamphlet. I don't know, is this your novel?
No, it's not a novel.
Yes.
This is a short story I wrote for the Ibua Lounge, the
Yes.
first Ibua Lounge. Yeah.
I see. Tell us about this Ibua thing.
What I can tell about Ibua Lounge, it's where you go to become no one. You go with dreams of being a writer. You go knowing that, I can write something. When you arrive there, you realize there is actually nothing you can do, and you need people to actually show you the ropes. So that's Ibua Lounge to me. It's where I go to learn. It's where I go to improve.
I see. Is that Ibua Lounge or Ibua Lab?
The lab.
Okay.
Sorry for the mistake.
Yeah, the name sounds similar, so I can
I'm a
understand.
bit shaky.
Let's begin with a little bit of this. What inspires you to write? What makes your words so exceptional? Because you think you don't know how to write, but your readers think differently.
I have this thing of imagining myself in other people's shoes, and how would I see the world in their shoes? How would I experience life in their shoes? And once I get to that, I write it down. And my writing started with writing to myself. I would imagine myself being a young girl. Then I write in our point of view and I read to myself. I keep them to myself. And then I used to share them until the Ibua Lab came up, and I said, let me just go with this. So what inspires me to write is the curiosity about other people's lives. Yeah. I think that's basically it.
All right. So, Mr. Achelam, you've been with the Lantern Meet how long?
Since 2014, so
Yeah.
3 years.
Since 2014 and 3 years. What difference do you see in terms of your journey as a writer from the time you joined the Lantern Meet, and how do spaces like this help writers?
At least I learned how to use big words. That's one thing.
Could your teacher have been Manzi?
No. Could have been an effect. But I came to Lantern Meet green. You know, I was a kadogo in these things, even performing poetry. And the first time I performed poetry was to a judge who was actually part of the Lantern Meet, and it was his comments that actually encouraged me to continue poetry. I used to write, but as I said, I used to do for myself, for my own, I keep to myself, keep them under books or something. But once I performed that time in 2014, I was encouraged to perform more and write more. And then there were these Sunday meets where you come, you bring your poem, you think you have made it in life, you arrive, and then they just pull it to bits. You go home thinking you've not done anything. So those Sunday meets where you sit down and critique poetry, talk about poetry, writing techniques, understanding poetry, even going through line to line and punctuations, the meaning of particular words, all that helped me to become a better writer. And it was a long journey. It wasn't. I didn't walk this journey alone.
Yes.
I had to perform with them. 3 shows.
Yeah.
There were 3 shows, and there were rehearsals for those shows, and there were auditions to the shows. So I had to, bring out whatever artist I had in me to manifest and at least be part of Lantern Meet. And also I had been stuck in Lantern Meet for some time.
Thank God she's not a woman.
When poetry in Uganda wasn't something that I was very well versed in. So what I did, I went online, I searched online, and Lantern Meet was the thing that came up.
Yeah.
So I started looking for things about the Lantern Meet and poetry, and so basically poetry in Uganda for me started with the Lantern Meet.
I see.
Performance poetry major.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Achelam, I'm sure like everybody who is watching you right now in the comfort of their office or at home, we're all dying to hear something of what this exceptional writer has to give us.
There's one question. Kinds of books I like to read.
Oh, what kind of books you like to read? Yes, please.
What kind of books do I like to read? I don't know. Recently I
heard you're a big fan of Red Pepper.
Don't believe whatever he's saying. No, not
Yeah.
Red Pepper. But sometimes maybe. There used to be Hyena back in the day. I don't know.
He's a good storyteller.
He's a good storyteller.
Yeah.
But the kinds of books I like to read. Let me see. Do I define it in terms of like the genre?
Well,
I don't
we
know.
could start with what you like in fiction, what you
I
like
like
in
in fiction.
non-fiction, what you like in poetry, or you could tell us some authors that come off head.
Oh,
Well,
well,
who you're reading right now?
I'm reading right now. Right now, what am I reading? I'm reading Eleanor Canton, author of The Lumineers, 2013 Man Booker winner. It's a huge book.
Also, you only read prize winners.
Not prize
We
winners.
consider kind of companies like this man likes to keep.
No, it stood out when I was looking for a book in the library. It stood out.
I see.
So but I do read Khaled Hosseini.
Oh, Khalid Husseini, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm a big fan of moments. I like to read something and feel what I am reading. You
Yes.
understand? I like to be in the place where whatever the book is describing. I want to be there. So if a book has that, then that's definitely the kind of book I read.
Wow. Mr. Achelam, please, we are dying to hear these words.
Okay. He knew such places. He had used them once before. Rooms with soundproofed windows and bulky metal doors, where only slits of light from tiny ventilator holes sliced through the pitch black darkness, casting treacherous shadows onto walls. In such places, you were disencumbered of all the superfluities of life and reduced to choosing between an easy death or a torturous one. His was the latter. At first, mundane things like social status, wealth, or influence would matter to you. But after losing a few teeth and getting habituated to the metal taste of your own blood, such trifling things waned into oblivion. They did not matter to the plain-clothed men who brought you here. When they started their work, you would sob, kick, beg, pray, and even scream your lungs out through the first day. Sob and beg some more through the second. And on the third day, you would sing your whole life story to them. It had been almost 11 days, but by then no one, not even you, could be able to keep track. Most of you, in fact, all of you, would be seesawing in and out of consciousness. You would slip into the comfort of darkness, dreams, or even hallucinations, only to wake up to noodles for limbs, needles for hair, for hair, whetted daggers for a palpitating heart, ferocious infernos for lungs, and clouted drum for a head. Your bowels would pour their contents onto the cold floor over which your agonizing body hangs. If you happen to be male, like your tormentors, your testicles would retract into your groin and your bladder would empty into an amalgam with the feces. Vapors from your excreta would billow throughout the room, priming the air with its fetid stench, and such air would suffice to thwart sleep. But if, unfortunately, you are female, there is leg room for your imagination to roam. Picture all the worst possible things you can think of. Things involving breasts as a lucrative avenue to motivating a confession. And seeing as you are brought there by men and your naked body sways in front of them, well, you can ideate the rest. Such places are normally used by military intelligence and most recently in the public eye by the Special Operations Unit of the police. This is where enemies of the state are taken to disappear. If you are lucky enough to abscond its jaws, you would fear death more than you do God. Msinguzi was in such a place. His unclad body gyred slow and pendulous at the end of a rope tautened from lagging at the cuffs, sondering his wrists and chafing his hands. His shoulders, dislodged from their sockets and from which the rest of him gently spun, stood above a stooped head owing to a bleary neck and lobed pain into his torso. In the dark, he slipped in and out of consciousness, circling the drain and feeling each harrowing sensation from his mangled flesh. He heard the muffled clang of the metal latch. He had, a long time ago, learned what this meant. His torturers were coming in for another session of poking, slicing, pounding, and charring of his excruciated body. The plopping of thick claret droplets of blood from his mouth and nose waned as a shrinking of metal against metal crescendoed. Then there was nothing. Warm blood flurried in his ears. A hammer thumped in his head. The struggling of the strained rope overhead chinked the handcuffs against each other. He took paltry sips of the algid air that sluiced over his hollowed emetic gums, dispelling relentless ripples of cold pangs through his head. The rusty hinges of the metal door slowly squeaked open. He could not hear the slathering of fluid as boots crashed into the urine-drenched floor. A switch was clicked, and a moment later, metal thwacked metal in one tumultuous clack, and the brattle that ensued reverberated through the room, dissipating with each second. Msinguzi was now fully conscious. The hiatus from agony had come to an end. Chills of horror walked down the stairs of his spine. Wewe, amuka! Msinguzi blinked his bruised eyes open, and light seared into them. In the thick broom, he saw a long, clammy nose and tired eyes inhumed by slouchy eyelids. A dumberative doom flitted across the eyes, like the ruddy scales of something lurking underneath the surface of murky water. Calloused fingers held up his head by the chin, squeezing it. Thorns behind Msinguzi's eyelids clawed into his eyes as he blinked. He willed his mouth open, but his jaws had been bitten shut. The fingers let go and his cumbrous head fell, straining his spine and sending a fulmination of pain throughout his body. Msinguzi screamed, but couldn't hear himself do so. His heart had not stopped stabbing his chest since the night he was caught. His lungs labored to expand against broken ribs shrunk around them, and to prevent him from biting his tongue, or as motivation to give information, his torturers had dug out all his teeth from their gums using a magalo. Your leader lost the election. Commingled with the hoarse sound, Msinguzi felt the warm air of the torturer's foul breath crash against his brow. He decided to brave the pain a bit longer, till the Major General completed the operation. By then, the information they required would not matter. Wake up! The foul-breathed man said to the other. Wake him up, now! Frigid water was poured onto him. It felt like several thousand needles poking his body simultaneously. Jabs of ice punctured into Musinguzi's body and trickled lazily along tortuous paths into lacerations, cooling the pangs of heat. He was now, again, awake. You should have chosen our side. We won the election. Now bodies of your generals have been appearing in ditches and trenches. We know your group is planning something. Foul breath said, moving calmly around Musinguzi's dripping body. The thrust from the icy water weighed heavy on Musinguzi's dislocated shoulders. His tongue, tasting bile, pushed out mouthfuls of blood from gushing gums, and his broken nose, upon inspiration, afforded the putrid mixture of the stench of metal and that of his excrete. Now, said the foul-breathed man, now in front of Musinguzi. He spread out his open palm, and a shadowy figure placed a thickened truncheon into it. Then he smiled at his dangling victim. Your faction, the old guard, is obsolete in this new era. The stout cudgel crashed into Foul-breath's fingers, playfully with a slapping sound. This was something meant to scare him into confession, but Musinguzi wasn't going to betray his leader. Inching closer to Musinguzi and slapping his baton into his hand and continuing to speak into his ear in a potentious tone. You are going to tell me where your fellow conspirators are. He raised Musinguzi's head by the chin with a stumpy furrow and stared into his timid eyes. Warm feculent vapor billowed to befoul the air. You rejected our offer to join us. Tunajua wewe ni askari. He paused. Do you know what we want? So just tell us. Bile itched at the back of Musinguzi's throat. He swallowed hard. Jolts of horror strewed his trembling body. His dithering knees knocked against themselves, and his lips quivered in endless convulsions. But he remained silent.
Wow.
Warm air thrust against Musinguzi's ear in a whisper. His heart sank. This is it. Time to die.
Wow, Mr. Achelam, I happened to run my eyes through the audience while you were reading, and I could feel people forgetting to breathe. It's okay, we can breathe now. Are you one of those writers who sits at their desk with a dictionary, and when they write is, they say, no, there must be another one?
I can say I look for synonyms. I don't like to repeat words. But once in a while I refer to the dictionary. I read a lot, and I like to read. Most of my time I am reading, leisure reading when I'm doing a number two. Yeah. I read. Yeah, I like to read, and as I read, and since we started the Ibua lab, I read with the writer's eye. So you read while noticing certain things, sentence structure, how we use a certain word, and then you make a mental note of, I'll use that word somewhere. So those words come to you when you are writing. You remember a story you read sometime, and this author used a certain word here like this. Maybe I think I can, turn it around and use it this way. So yeah.
What is the inspiration for this kind of settings in your story?
The inspiration for this story was an imagination of where my Uganda would be sometime in the future, or in fiction. Not I'm not predicting anything. Don't quote me wrong. So it was before I had the plan to write the story. It was before the 2016 elections, and there was this thing of rigging of votes, and so I thought, well, what if there was a coup? What would happen if there was a coup? How would things? What would happen in Uganda? It was an active coup where there was actually live firing of live bullets and killing of people. So I thought maybe I can write something. Imagine and write something.
Well, sometime in the 1960s, Chinua Achebe wrote a story in which he predicted a secession, one of the regions in in Nigeria seceding, and 2 years later, Biafra appeared. Do you suspect that perhaps, what would happen if what you write comes to pass?
A disclaimer: I am not a prophet. I'm not saying whatever is going to whatever I wrote is going to happen. I hope it doesn't happen. And if it happens, then it's very sad.
There seems to be this obsession between African writers and the political context or the political situation. Just this morning I was reading an excerpt from Alex Mukulu, and he was saying, you see, writing or theater or drama is about conflict. And in societies like Africa, the drama that happens in our politics is more interesting than the drama that happens in the minds of writers. So it got me wondering about this relationship between politics and writers, and why African writers tend to use the political reality to write their fiction, which isn't something we find so much with writers from other regions. Is this something that applies to you as well, or something that you've seen in other writers? And what do you think this means for you as a writer?
Now that you've mentioned it, I didn't realize that there's a lot of African literature that has the backdrop of war. Biafra, Chimamanda is popular for that, and many others. So, but it's not that it's all about that the conflict is always political.
Yes,
I've read stories where it was love,
yes.
Ordinary things such as love, loss of a child,
yes.
Disabilities, feminism also. This it's not the only thing, but the truth is, anyone can seek and observe from anything. Politics in Africa is something that sparks a lot of interest in the readers and African people, and to use that as a way of communicating something is a way for a writer to reach out, to grab their attention, and yeah. Okay. So I think politics is a good way to but I don't think it's the only way we can go.
How do you manage to reconcile this lover man who is wooing a girl and this man who is torturing? How do you reconcile these things in your head?
Some writers said they are not different, but to me, prose and poetry are totally different things. I find poetry requires a certain mindset, it requires a certain atmosphere, it requires a certain rhythm, a certain feel, it requires a certain spirituality. And poetry needs you to tap into something, So like that poem taps into an experience of mine.
Yeah.
So I think, and for prose, this is now a lot of imagination, a lot of what if this happens, what would happen, a lot of questions and trying to answer and trying to maybe allow the reader to answer the question in their own way. And poetry, I think it's an experience and bring it out. Poetry to me is painting pictures, but in words.
What would you say to your peer who may not be as interested in reading as you are?
What you should know, a good writer is a good reader and a good editor. The more you feed your mind, the more it will produce. So you need to feed your mind. You need to know how others have done it. You need to know the rules such that you can break them. You need to know the rules that have been broken such that you can maybe break them in a different way and stand out, so that you don't look cliche or something. So you need to read in order to write. That's
about as much time as we have for this later interview. But would like to cue in just 3 people from the audience to throw in a quick comment or question for Achalam, and then we can call this a wrap. Yes, sir. And please introduce yourself for our audience online.
My name is Sami Gideon Metala, and I'm an artist. And what I would like to say to you is that's a very good issue. I do know, and we've had this conversation before, I do know more of saving lives in terms of your medical profession. and now you're here and you're putting your life there. Do you think, with the kind of writing that you've just read, your life is safe?
I was wondering when that was coming to come out.
Mr. Achelam, are you worried that the moment the story is released, perhaps you might be banded into a black Land Rover and taken to Nalufenia?
First of all, this story is fiction. It's a work of fiction. It's from imagination. I just made all this up. All the names are not real names. I just made them up. But
any resemblances to real characters are purely coincidental.
Coincidental, yeah. Coincidental. So, that question with the no, I do not think. There are certain things that I think I did not hint upon, maybe with that in mind, and maybe I held back, or I didn't hold back. I'm not sure. The reader will decide on that. But I do not think it would have. I do not think that would happen.
Okay.
Yeah. And about the other thing, that is, can I call it a career?
Our viewers online, Mr. Achelam is a medical doctor by training. It's something we had omitted to mention in the beginning, and somebody in the audience is wondering, how does he make the transition from saving lives to putting his life at risk?
But the transition between medicine, between saving lives and putting my, am I putting my life at risk? If I am, then I'll definitely put my life at risk more, you know. But
wow,
yeah.
Wow. About the same time next month, you will be meeting another one of our residents from Ibua. But in the time being, you can find the stories that we'll be discussing in this show and the poetry that we shall be reading on this show online on our website at lanternmeet.com. Once again, from us here at the studio in Uganda Society Library, we are very grateful to the Lantern Meet, one, for creating the space, Ibua for writers. We are very grateful to 8 Media, which got together with the Lantern Meet Foundation to create the space for writing and for literature. We are also very grateful to the Uganda Society Library, which is hosting us here today. We are also very grateful to the African Studies Bookstore and Book Club, which hosts the Ibua Lounge and also supplies the literature that we read. We had a little bit of poetry from Achelam earlier in the show. We had a little bit of his short story writing, and now I would like to close this with just one more poem from Achelam. Some words for you to live and spend the night with.
Weak arms, tired legs. From weak arms pinned to the ground, to the decrepit legs spread and bound, tired of kicking their feet. Death seems sweet than being held down. From her cracked lips bleeding into his, to the shattered teeth she spits. He speaks. Shh! Don't fight! You wanted this. Her tongue caresses gums to taste where her teeth used to be. Swollen cheeks bashed in, black eyes blurred by tears. She sees nothing but his apparition hovering. With fingers digging and scratching into the ground, unkempt hair, muddied, scattered around, she searches for nothing more by the semblance of a remedy, something to end the pound. Her frigid body lies bare, nipples harden painfully, terror creeping from the rungs of her spine, despair. She thinks, what will be after all this comes to be? Will death even accept me? Her thighs torn asunder, innocence plucked from its cave, she hears her skin rave. pleading with her feeble mind to save her from the pain, shouting for it to stop, for everything to end. I should never have worn that arousing dress, exposed my breasts, my rump, my back, my chest. I should be spending the night in the embrace of my mattress. Instead, it is into the mud that I bleed my innocence. I wish my legs were fast enough to run back through time. I wish the night would turn to day. Why me? Why him? Why now? I wish I were dead. I wish I were never born. I wish. Her mind speaks, regrets and silent wishes spilling from it. A thudding heart bleeds, and in two wheezing lungs, she sips the alcohol in his breath that nourishes her air. Her somber cheek pressed down, throbbing with pangs of heat, to another with deafened ears held still. Still he speaks. Shh, you taste so sweet. She squeezes her eyelids shut, lover for tears released. An open mouth, she gags for breath. Please, please. Her neck is held in his fist. Above her, on his grim face, the heathen wears a grin, pleasures of a beast. She feels the warm dagger stabbing as he heaves. She cries her lungs out, but her screams, her lips never leave.
Wow, thank you. Okay.